Welcome to the Connection Podcast. I am Lauren Dry, also known as the Connection Catalyst. Connection and this podcast for me is personal. As a driven professional, I found myself an expert in all things work and business, but it was at home that I really needed clarity and ease. After finally finding it one marriage breakdown and one marriage reset later, and finally discovering what really works to have connection in modern relationships, using science, simplicity, and soul, our signature program, Rise into Regulation, was born. That's giving so many others in modern, driven relationships back clarity and ease for good. On the podcast today, we're going to dive deep together on all things relationships, business, identity, and leadership. And clarity and ease is at the heart of it all. And we are so happy to be with you so that you can have what you need in connection, mind, body, and soul too.
Welcome back to episode 3 of the Rewiring Series. We are going to hang out today and talk about all the things you should and shouldn't do if you feel like you are the only person who is doing the work in the relationship. The lines between self-sacrifice and self-abandonment versus actual work, support, growth, and integrity inside a relationship. And the difference between trying to work on the relationship to save it versus working on your patterns to make sure that you can have a healthy relationship no matter what, inside this relationship or in any other, so that the pattern really gets broken and you're not just trying to rescue or perform or have an okay experience inside a relationship that doesn't serve you, that isn't healthy, and that doesn't serve you or your family in the long run. Today, we're going to cover what to do when one person is doing the rewiring or is considering doing the rewiring and the other is not. Now, I want to start off, first of all, by sharing with you a story about a friend of mine who's going through a separation. Absolutely stunning woman, someone who would stop anyone in the street when they're walking past. And the reason why her relationship is ending at the moment, those reasons are really sound. She's not made this decision lightly, and the next season of her life is focused solely on the children, making sure that the co-parenting dynamic can be set up really healthily, but also in the future, making sure that this cycle never repeats. Now, she's done the work, she's done this counseling, she's really focused on making sure that every decision she has made has been for the benefit of everyone. But she does have this bubbling awareness starting to come up of, okay, how do I make sure that I don't end up in this situation or accidentally choose the same person again? She is at the new stages of this kind of awareness. Her focus on what she was going to do, whether she was going to stay or whether she was going to go, all of that has been focused on very practical reasons up until now. But it was interesting recently, we were having a conversation about something that continues to bother her and has bothered her her entire life. As stunning as she is, there are some unique characteristics about her features that can be show-stopping, I think, in the best of ways. Let's just say she has very unique hair and it's stunning and it's beautiful and it often gets complimented on. There are times, however, where she feels that those comments veer from compliments into statements, judgments, pointing out that there's a difference there that shouldn't be pointed out. And it is something that bothers her, that sometimes she has awareness that it either shouldn't bother her as much as it does, or she finds herself in a situation where even if she knows that the comment is innocent, she feels torn between correcting and educating the person around the right things to say versus letting it go, focusing on relationship building, brushing it off, perhaps at the expense, though, of her own protection and her own nurturing of healthy sensitivity. What started there was a little bit of a deep dive into why this has been such a concern or challenge or sensitivity for her entire life, even though she is so successful in so many other areas of her life. This one component of her sense of confidence continues to be shaken, whether she wishes it to be or not. This may sound like something innocent, but when you track that pattern backwards, when you take into account how successful she is, how long she stayed in a relationship that wasn't serving her, her own background, her own attachment style, and other smaller quirks and triggers that can affect her life, even though there's a part of her wishing that it didn't, but also feeling torn about the fact that she should stand up for herself. It should be something that other people should know or be aware of if they are around her. When you track all these minor and major life events, what is built is a pattern that weaves a thread through all of her decisions, her relationships, and the views that she holds about herself. And as a pattern expert, finally being given free rein to allow her to have a look at some of this pattern tracking has been a really unique experience for her, because it can be very jarring to see that although many of the challenges that she's faced and the faults and the flaws of her partner, she can comfortably say were not her responsibility, not on her shoulders, and not something that she needs to take accountability for. There is a common thread there that she can track back to her childhood that provides color around so many different events in her life, right through to even how she takes compliments about her hair or comments, however you perceive that tracks back to a simple, repeatable pattern, a pattern that is continuing despite ending one relationship for all the right reasons, has the potential to create the same pattern elsewhere, whether she wishes it to or not, even if she has the highest level of discernment, even if she expects and surrenders to the fact that there are so many things outside of her control. It is so valuable to remember and to identify the fact that if we can find out where our patterns are and rewire them, we don't have to work so hard to have hypervigilance and micro level awareness around other people's faults and flaws, because we have a deep sense of trust in our own intuition and our own decision making capabilities, whether that's choosing a partner, ending a relationship, or bringing up a conversation about the dishes late at night in a way that allows you to get your needs met. So often, when we even consider beginning doing any work on our relationship and the other person isn't a participant in the process, or perhaps has avoidant patterns and feels really challenged at even looking at themselves, looking at the relationship, or looking at their own background and history, the person who does have a history and does have a background and does have a comfort level around doing the work is often faced with two choices. I carry the weight of the relationship and almost step into a coaching role of my partner because they refuse to do the work, or they're not at a comfort level of doing the work, or we don't believe they have the capacity to do the work. And the consequence is often a huge level of resistance, resentment, frustration, a sense of loneliness and bitterness about the fact that the person doing the work has to carry the weight of two people. And so that even if the relationship does end up being successful, the pain point around that is often so deeply linked to a sense of loneliness and self abandonment, because the success of the relationship has only been because one person feels like they've carried the weight of two, instead of being able to receive support and receive care and receive teamwork. Or in order to feel like there's not a sense of self abandonment, that person is forced to choose being alone, accepting the fact that there won't be support, and carrying on into another relationship, or ending the marriage, or existing without satisfaction inside the loneliness of a relationship without support, because the alternative, doing the work alone, feels so jarring and isolating and debilitating. So, those two choices can feel both as though there's a death involved, so to speak, either death of self or death of the relationship. What a heavy burden to bear, particularly if you are someone who is very intelligent, is very capable, and feels like if you just have the right tools, you'll be able to get what you need. I do believe that there's a middle ground though, and that middle ground is really exploring, how can I do the work, in inverted commas, in a way that allows me to have enough awareness to understand where the common thread is and where the pattern is that has contributed to any of this dynamic at all, who I chose, why I chose them, why this toxic cycle repeats, why I feel this way about myself in this or any other relationship, why I have these sensitivities, whether they're small or large, and how can I be set free of them so I can have my needs met in a really supportive and productive way without it feeling like I'm carrying the weight of the relationship for two people. or forcing myself to feel like the only sense of satisfaction I can have is alone or lonely in a relationship that's unhealthy. The ultimate truth on the surface of things is the fact that we can't regulate, heal, or rewire somebody else for them. And neuroscience tells us that not only 95% of relationships, decisions, and behaviors are driven by the unconscious mind. So things shift and change in the most powerful way when we do change our own hidden patterns. But also, 93% of communication is nonverbal. So if we do feel a sense of confidence, security, and autonomy in the way that we do communicate, we do show up in relationships and in our lives, often the work doesn't mean that we have to try harder, push harder, find the right and perfect thing to say anymore, but simply it becomes a deeper sense of security, safety, and confidence in the way that we do show up in communication and relationships. And our body becomes something that's on our team. Our tone of voice, our body language, our facial expressions, they all start to work for us in a way that allows our needs to get met, as opposed to our words saying one thing and our body screaming something completely different. And that fight happening between our mind and our body that creates tension, that creates dysfunction, and that creates internal resentment, even from ourselves, and creates internal dialogues and thoughts like, why am I bothering? Why am I even trying? Because even when I do try as hard as possible, it's never landing the way I want to. Ultimately, at the heart of doing the work or beginning a rewiring journey inside any relationship, or for the purposes of having a healthy relationship, the core motivating factor of beginning that journey at any point in time must always come down to answering the question, who am I doing the work for? If you are doing the work to save a relationship at any cost, even if the cost is the relationship with your own self, save yourself the trouble and the relationship right now, or don't begin a new one, because all you are doing is inviting grief, hurt, pain, shame in your relationship with your own self, which doesn't result in a healthy and conducive and secure relationship with anybody. However, if you are beginning the work or rewiring journey to allow yourself to be set free from these patterns and these dynamics that have kept you trapped in this relationship or in any other in the past or potentially in the future, that is a beautiful gift to give yourself, your extended family, your friends, your children, and all the generations following them, because you have broken the cycle. And simply by witnessing how you have become free from these patterns, the ripples that flow on from that are never ending. What a gift, not only to yourself, but to everyone around you, that doesn't come at the cost of your own relationship with self. The keys to rewiring from that place begin, first of all, by understanding a few facts. One, co-regulation is real. As we've just mentioned, 93% of communication is nonverbal, 95% of our habits, decisions, behaviors, they are driven by the unconscious mind. We have huge power and huge influence over the events and outcomes of our life, including what happens in our relationships, when we understand how powerful co-regulation is. And that happens when we feel a deep sense of security within ourselves. Affecting someone else's nervous system doesn't mean manipulating them by changing how you move your body, your facial expressions, and how you show up. It means understanding that when we feel that deep sense of security, natural change happens organically in other people. And there's freedom there for them to step into accountability without being wrapped up in shame, defensiveness, and protection, because that old dynamic of toxic patterns are not being fed into that relationship by one person. When we understand that, we focus on our own regulation because we want to feel security, not because we're trying to make the other person feel secure. And that, strangely enough, is what allows the other person to finally take accountability, because there's room to do it, not because they're being forced or dragged. Two, nervous system accountability is not contagious enough to override someone else's personal responsibility. So yes, one regulated partner helps. It helps immensely, far more than you could possibly ever imagine. And one person cannot and should not hold the weight and the burden of driving the relationship forever. It will create accountability and it will create deep invitations that weren't there before. And true rewiring allows you to have discernment over when and where it might even be healthy for both people to create harder lines of accountability and invitations for the other person to step into their own journey and even consequences around perhaps exploring what their life would look like outside of a relationship as well. Many people have fear about this. Okay, if we hit a point in time where the other person does get an opportunity to leave the relationship, are they going to take it? Ultimately, holding on to a relationship by taking part in an unhealthy dynamic does not rescue the relationship at all. It simply prevents both people from experiencing growth. And that does happen one way or another through life. So, when you do have an opportunity to allow that to happen first for yourself, that does allow the other person to grow. Could that possibly create a situation where the outcome is unexpected or maybe even not desired? Perhaps. But I challenge you to explore the fact that perhaps that may be happening or has already happened. But without that accountability and that interest and that growth from one person to allow that to be an opportunity for that to finally open the door to healthy growth as opposed to stagnation and disconnection and resentment, all we are doing is prolonging the inevitable as opposed to embracing possibility and happiness for everyone in the dynamic. We cannot change anyone, nor should we want to. But if there is a possibility for that person to change, it happens without forcing, pushing, and controlling the other person to do as we wish and what we desire. In fact, it's the opposite. When we choose to have that growth and that experience ourselves, finally, there's room for the other person to finally step into that space. And the third scientific fact to understand is that research consistently shows us that emotional safety will predict the satisfaction in a relationship or the outcome of a relationship far more strongly than avoiding conflict of any kind. So, feeling like you are trying to salvage a relationship by avoiding conflict will most often create that outcome at a much higher rate than exploring what emotional safety can look like for you and your own path and your own resetting of your own patterns. Yes, we can't control anyone, but it's so interesting how when we take accountability and the power back for our own selves, how much more power we actually do have. A couple of things to understand is that your partner does not need a therapist or constant psychoanalysis or lectures about the nervous system. If you know anything about the Cartman drama triangle or attachment style theory at all, you'll know that this doesn't work. It also doesn't create trust in the relationship and trust that the other person has the capacity to grow. It's also exhausting. What they do need is clarity, connected boundaries, which is signature to the RISE system, emotional accountability, and consistency. We can begin to be the catalyst of that in a relationship by really exploring what connected boundaries are for us. I explore this in a few of my past podcast episodes. I'll link one of them in the show notes. But also realizing that we get to be set free from this dynamic. And by setting ourselves free, we actually set everyone else around us free as well to finally step up. The most effective form of education is actually modeling. So when we take accountability, when we show how free we can be, when we show how regulated that we can be, and we can show that to ourselves, not to anyone else around us, that's what really creates room for other people to see that that's possible. It's safe, it's secure, it creates freedom, it creates connection, it creates growth, and it creates joy, which is something that's so often missing when toxic dynamics have been around in not only one relationship, but often for a lifetime. My friend with such beautiful hair is now focusing not just on the elements of divorce, the elements of the financial bits and pieces to make sure that everyone is set up well for the rest of their lives. The conversations about co parenting and the conversations with her own self about what her future is going to look like. She's also now focused on making sure that the rest of her life is focused on the patterns that support her to have the kind of life that she wants. No longer about just protection and just hypervigilance and just worrying about what is going to go wrong. And from that place, only connecting with people who will feed into that dynamic and who feel familiar in that dynamic Instead, what she's going to be able to focus on is not just on all the things that are going right, as though that's putting blinkers on and she's living in la la land and ignoring all these possible comments that may or may not be compliments. She is just instead being able to intuitively recognize healthy connections. She's able to contribute to healthy conversations. She's going to be able to walk into any room and feel as though everyone there is capable of lifting her up and contributing to her growth and growing alongside her, and having enough discernment to be able to spot the difference between an unhealthy conversation, an unhealthy comment, and an unhealthy connection with a friend or an intimate relationship or a family member ever, and instead spot the possibilities and contribute only to the possibilities and contribute only her energy to those connections that will build her up and lift her up, as opposed to the ones that match the energy of protection and familiarity of old toxic patterns, which will just leave her in the same situation again, just with a different person. The question should never be, what if my partner never changes? And the answer should never just be, well, you'll have to leave them or you'll have to try harder. The answer really lies in understanding that regulated people stop abandoning themselves and making themselves small and staying in those small fears that result in larger fears that result in the same resentments, the same frustrations, and the same confusion and loneliness in this or any relationship. Regulated people don't abandon themselves to maintain connection at all. They build into themselves and they allow others to love them in a way that is non negotiable and a match for who they really are at the root, not just who they are at a protection level. If you feel like you've been doing the work for a really long time and you are feeling lonely and exhausted, I want to leave you with the fact that you are allowed to keep becoming healthier without forcing anybody else to become who you need them to be. Instead, allow yourself to experience the fact that when you set yourself free, you allow others to set themselves free and either join you on the journey that you're going to experience in a positive way no matter what, or experience the consequences of their own fears and their own worries. And perhaps experiencing their own fears and their own worries will create a level of accountability and growth that wasn't possible for them before. But we shouldn't hold them back from that growth and that healthy discomfort just because we're afraid of that certain level of healthy discomfort that does catalyze really healthy growth for everyone. So, no, the answer doesn't lie in forcing them to change because you're leaving them, or tolerating bad behavior just because experiencing growth feels so frustrating. It feels like you're coaching them, it feels like you're guiding them and dragging them along the way. You really get to set yourself free and rewire at the root, irrelevant of what your partner is or isn't doing, and offer that gift to everyone else in your life, especially the generations to come as well. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like and follow along to continue on the journey in the Rewiring series. And if this has brought up anything for you, come and chat with me over on Instagram at Lauren_Dry. And if you are curious about what rewiring looks like and the system inside of Rise that is supporting so many women and couples across the world to rewire and reset at the root so they can have clarity and ease in any relationship, I'll put some information in the show notes and you can come and join us anytime. Big love.